A bartender stops a mafia empire from signing its own death sentence, but the most dangerous man in the room decides to spare her life, not because he is merciful, but because she just exposed a $19 million lie buried in his own contract. The pen trembled in Marcus Devereaux's grip as he hovered it above the document. His suit was impeccable, but his face betrayed him. Sweat gathered at his temples, his mouth clenched so tightly the muscles beneath his skin stood out like steel cables. Around him sat the council of his empire, dressed in identical dark suits, eyes fixed on the asset transfer agreement. To them, it was a death warrant, and the pen in Marcus's hand was the instrument of execution. This document would transfer half of Marcus's business holdings to his rival, Viktor Sokolov. It was supposed to be a settlement, a truce between two warring factions that threatened to consume the entire underworld of the city. But it also meant something far more sinister. It meant the beginning of the end. Then a voice broke through the silence. A bartender stood near the doorway, clutching a serving tray laden with expensive whiskey. Her uniform was faded, her fingers still damp from working behind the bar, but her eyes were focused on the papers with an intensity that suggested she had noticed something vital. One of Marcus's closest associates, Sebastian Cray, moved without hesitation. His hand drifted toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "This is a private discussion. You should not be here. Remove her immediately." But Marcus did not move. For the first time in weeks, someone in that room had spoken with genuine conviction, someone who was not afraid, who seemed to care about something other than power and survival. The bartender moved forward, her voice shaking despite her determination. "There is an error in the paperwork," she said, extending her finger to point at a specific line. "A significant error. One that could change everything." Marcus's hand froze above the signature line. One small mistake might determine the fate of his entire empire. The man who raised his hand to stop Sebastian was Adrian Thorne, the true architect of power in this room. While Marcus held the title of leader, it was Adrian who manipulated events from behind the scenes, who made the strategic decisions. His pale gray eyes locked onto the bartender with an intensity that suggested he was reading her very thoughts. Adrian turned to Edmund Carlyle, a distinguished gentleman with salt and pepper hair. Edmund had served as Adrian's personal attorney for 15 years, the legal architect who had examined every clause within this document with obsessive precision. "Check the document again," Adrian instructed Edmund. "Specifically examine the line that she indicated. Do it now." Edmund nodded and began frantically turning through the pages of the contract. His fingers trembled slightly as they traced across each number. The young bartender, whose name was Elena Summers, stood motionless with her tray clutched in her hands. Her heart pounded against her ribs with such force that she wondered if others could hear it echoing through the room. She had no idea whether she had just committed an act of remarkable bravery or catastrophic stupidity. She only knew that she had observed something and found herself unable to remain silent in the face of it. Then Edmund suddenly lifted his head, and his face drained of all color. He glanced at Adrian, then down at the document, then back at Adrian again, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. "She is correct in her observation," Edmund said to Adrian. "The consolidated debt has been recorded as 47 million units of currency. However, according to the original agreement, only 60% was supposed to be transferred to our organization. The actual figure should be 28 million units. There exists an additional 19 million units that has no legitimate justification, no contractual basis, no reason for its existence." Adrian remained silent, but the muscles in his jaw tightened. His hands clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles turned white. 19 million. The sum was staggering in its magnitude. It was sufficient to drive him into bankruptcy. It was capable of destroying everything that Adrian had constructed across 2 decades of brutal dominance. And this had not occurred by accident. Someone had perpetrated this fraudulent act deliberately, with calculated precision, with the intention of transferring Adrian's wealth to his enemy. The man representing Viktor's interests, Dmitry Volkov, sprang to his feet so suddenly that his chair toppled backward with a loud crash. His face flushed a deep purple as rage flooded through his system. "What deception is this? Are you attempting to obstruct the completion of this agreement?" Adrian rose slowly from his position. He stood nearly a full head taller than Dmitri, his frame conveying an impression of controlled power rather than explosive violence. I will not sign this document until every numerical value has been subjected to independent verification. Every figure must be confirmed from its origin point. Dmitri's teeth ground together. You are granted 72 hours to provide the correct payment or to execute the legitimate transfer, Adrian. If you fail to accomplish either objective within this timeframe, do not hold Viktor Sokolov responsible for his merciful intentions proving inadequate. 2 weeks transformed everything. Newspaper headlines screamed the story across their front pages. Television news networks led with the announcement as their lead story every evening. Social media platforms erupted in a cascade of posts and commentary. The arrest of Marcus Devereaux had been the catalyst for the federal law enforcement agency's most significant operational success in a decade. A criminal organization had finally collapsed under the weight of accumulated evidence. Dozens of individuals faced indictment. The general public celebrated, satisfied that justice had finally prevailed. Yet, through all of this media frenzy, one name remained completely absent. Adrian Thorne did not appear in a single news publication. His involvement was mentioned in no newspaper article. His existence was acknowledged by no media outlet whatsoever. It was as though he did not exist, as though he had never been part of the machinery that drove the downfall of Marcus's organization. This omission was not coincidental. It was the central component of an agreement reached between Adrian and federal law enforcement authorities. Adrian would remain silent regarding his involvement, would provide necessary testimony in exchange for his continued invisibility in the public narrative. In return, the FBI would ensure that his name never appeared in any official capacity related to the investigation or the prosecutions that followed. During those 2 weeks, Adrian engaged in consolidation and reorganization of his criminal enterprise. His organization had suffered wounds from within. Derek Ashton, his lieutenant and trusted confidant for 8 years, had revealed himself to be a traitor, a mole planted by Viktor Sokolov. The betrayal had left gaping holes in Adrian's structure of trust. Each person in his organization underwent scrutiny. Every transaction was examined with meticulous care. Every relationship was tested and verified against standards of absolute loyalty. A man named Thomas Marshall, who had proved his trustworthiness through years of service and moments of crisis, emerged as Adrian's new right hand, his new confidant, his new strategic advisor. Thomas had been tested by fire and blood, and he had demonstrated the kind of unwavering commitment that Adrian demanded of those closest to him. But in the midst of this restructuring, a piece of news arrived that caused all operations to pause. The announcement emerged from the hospital where Elena's sister, Grace Summers, had been undergoing heart surgery for a congenital condition that had plagued her entire life. The surgeon who emerged from the operating room carried a smile of genuine relief and satisfaction. The operation had exceeded all expectations. The damaged heart had been repaired with surgical precision. The young woman would survive. She would live a normal life, would experience a future that had previously seemed impossible. Elena received this news while standing in the hospital corridor, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to release the emotions she had held trapped within her body. Tears flowed down her cheeks, but they were not tears born of sorrow or fear. These were tears of profound happiness, of relief so complete that her entire body seemed to release tension it had carried for an eternity. She wept without restraint because her sister, her only family, her primary motivation through all the chaos and danger, would live. Following her surgery, Grace Summers received care in a private hospital suite within Adrian's penthouse residence. She was attended by private physicians and private nurses. Color gradually returned to her previously pallid complexion. Her lips began to display a natural rosiness. A genuine smile began to emerge more frequently. Elena observed all of this transformation, watching her sister recover, watching the luxurious surroundings that her sister now inhabited, watching a lifestyle that she had never permitted herself to imagine or hope for. And in watching all of this, Elena understood that a decision point had been reached. One afternoon, as the sun descended toward the horizon and cast all of Chicago in a golden light, Elena made her way to Adrian's office. She discovered him seated behind his desk, his attention absorbed by various documents and files. She positioned herself directly in front of his desk, drew in a deep breath to steady herself, and began to speak. "My purpose here is complete," Elena said to Adrian. "My sister is healthy now. My objective has been achieved. I believe I should depart from your employ and from your residence." Adrian continued reading the document before him. He did not look up as he responded. "Depart to where, precisely, Elena?" Elena hesitated. "I have not determined a specific destination. Perhaps I might seek employment elsewhere. Perhaps I might attempt to return to my previous life, to whatever normalcy remains available to someone with my history." Adrian set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "A normal life? You believe yourself capable of returning to bartending, to serving customers, to maintaining a facade of normalcy after everything you have experienced?" Elena remained silent because she understood his point. She had witnessed violence and bloodshed. She had observed death. She had stepped into a world that consumed most people who entered it. The mechanics of returning to her previous existence seemed impossibly absurd. Adrian stood and moved around his desk, advancing toward Elena until he stood directly before her. His gray eyes, cold and penetrating, fixed themselves upon her face with unrelenting intensity. "I require someone who prioritizes honesty above all other considerations. Someone who communicates truth not because of coercion or financial motivation, but because honesty is the correct course of action, regardless of consequences." Elena responded, "You command an organization of considerable size and influence. You possess the resources to recruit anyone you might desire. Why would you settle for a former bartender when you could employ accomplished professionals with years of experience?" Adrian's voice dropped lower, more intimate. "I do not want just anyone. I want you specifically, Elena Summers." In that moment, Elena understood the full scope of what was being offered to her. This was not merely a job proposition. Adrian was offering her a position of genuine significance within his organization. He was offering her a place at his side, a role in the machinery of power that controlled a substantial portion of the city's underworld. He was offering her a future that transcended anything she had previously conceived as possible. Elena articulated her reservations. "I do not believe I possess the qualities necessary to function successfully within your world. I do not think I truly belong among the people and mechanisms that comprise your organization." Adrian smiled, a genuine smile, unguarded, without the characteristic coldness that typically characterized his expressions. "You have belonged to this world since the moment you walked into that conference room, carrying a serving tray of beverages. Your arrival in that space was the catalyst that changed the trajectory of everything. And if I discover you attempting to do something incorrect again, if I find you challenging my decisions or my methods, I believe I will genuinely welcome such confrontation. That is precisely why I require your services. Your willingness to challenge power when that power is moving in the wrong direction. Your ability to perceive errors that others have overlooked. Your commitment to honesty, even when honesty becomes costly." Elena examined Adrian's face carefully, considering all that had transpired, contemplating the journey that had delivered her to this specific moment, thinking about her sister Grace, sleeping peacefully in the adjacent room. After a period of silent reflection, Elena provided her response. "I will accept your offer," Elena said, "but with conditions attached to the agreement. I want to complete my formal education in accounting and finance. I want my sister to remain in this residence until she achieves full recovery from her surgery. I want the explicit right to tell you that you are making mistakes whenever I identify them. And I want assurance that exercising this right will not result in my execution or physical harm." Adrian laughed, a sound of genuine amusement that filled the office with unexpected warmth. "You are indeed testing the boundaries of my patience and my temper, Elena Summers. You are establishing conditions as though we were negotiating between equals, rather than discussing employment with a significant power differential." Elena responded with her own smile. "I am aware of the challenge I present. I understand that I am testing your limits, and I believe that is precisely the function you are hiring me to perform." 6 months transformed from theory into lived experience. Elena discovered that she existed within a dream state, one that she had never permitted herself to believe she would be allowed to inhabit. She had access to educational opportunities that had previously seemed like distant fantasies. She attended university courses in accounting, finance, and business administration. She worked within Adrian's organization, observing operations, learning systems, gradually integrating herself into the machinery of power. Grace's recovery accelerated beyond medical expectations. The girl, freed from the constant shadow of cardiac illness that had defined her childhood, began to experience childhood with genuine enthusiasm. She explored the penthouse, interacted with the staff, gradually developed a personality that had been constrained and diminished by years of medical fragility. Watching her sister blossom became Elena's greatest reward, her constant reminder of why she had chosen to remain within Adrian's world, despite the dangers it presented. During these 6 months, Elena discovered multiple aspects of Adrian's character that his public persona did not reveal. Behind the cold exterior and the ruthless decision-making lay a capacity for patience that seemed at odds with his violent profession. He reviewed Elena's accounting assignments, offering corrections and suggestions without the contempt she might have anticipated. He ensured that Grace received the medical follow-up care necessary to confirm her recovery remained on track. One evening, as Elena worked through accounting problems in her temporary office within the penthouse, Adrian entered unexpectedly. She looked up from her calculations, surprised by his presence. "I have been investigating the origin of the fraudulent 19 million figure in that contract," Adrian said to Elena. "I have determined the responsible party." Derek Ashton had programmed the error into the system before his true allegiances were revealed. He had positioned it precisely so that you would notice it, so that the contract would fail, so that I would be vulnerable during my interaction with Viktor Sokolov. Elena processed this information carefully. The man you trusted more than anyone else attempted to destroy you through fraud and manipulation. That must have been profoundly difficult to process. Adrian did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice was measured and thoughtful. "I have learned that trust placed in others is frequently misplaced. I have learned that even those closest to us harbor secrets and motivations we cannot fully comprehend. I have learned that the only person whose integrity I can absolutely rely upon is myself." But then you walked into that room, and you demonstrated that there exists at least one other person in this world whose honesty operates independent of personal gain or self-preservation. He paused. "This is why I offered you the position. This is why I wanted you at my side. You are the exception to the rule of universal dishonesty. You are the reminder that goodness can coexist with power. You are the evidence that corruption is not inevitable in my world." Elena stood and moved closer to Adrian. In those 6 months, the barrier that had initially separated them had not completely dissolved, but it had become significantly less rigid. Understanding had replaced suspicion. Respect had replaced wariness. "The organization continues to expand," Adrian said to Elena. "I am preparing to make significant moves against the remaining factions that challenge my authority. I want you to understand what that means. It means there will be violence. It means there will be consequences for those who resist. It means you will bear witness to actions that might contradict the honesty and ethics you hold so strongly." Elena acknowledged his warning with a simple response. "I understand what I am choosing. I have understood since I walked into that room with the tray of drinks. I made my decision consciously, with full knowledge of the consequences. I am not choosing you despite your world. I am choosing you precisely because you permitted me to maintain my principles, even while I exist within your structure." As 2026 progressed through the seasons, Elena gradually assumed more significant responsibilities within Adrian's organization. She managed financial operations with meticulous care. She verified contract terms with the precision of a trained professional. She audited transactions with the meticulous attention to detail that had first brought her to Adrian's attention. and she continued to challenge him whenever she identified decisions that seemed ethically compromised or strategically flawed. For his part, Adrian found Elena's challenges increasingly valuable. Her perspective, unburdened by the cynicism that corrupted others in his profession, offered insights that his more experienced advisors frequently overlooked. Her moral framework ensured that his organization maintained a boundary between necessary ruthlessness and gratuitous cruelty. By the end of that year, Elena had formally completed her accounting certification. She had also begun taking on roles that transcended simple financial management. She participated in strategic planning sessions. She was consulted on decisions affecting the organization's major directions. She had become, in every meaningful way, a partner in Adrian's enterprise. Elena Summers, who had begun as a bartender serving drinks in a high-stakes meeting, had discovered a world and a purpose that she had never anticipated finding. And Adrian Thorne, the powerful man who had built an empire through ruthlessness and strategic brilliance, had discovered in Elena something that his vast wealth and authority could never have purchased: genuine companionship from someone who saw him clearly, understood him completely, and valued him not for his power, but for his willingness to evolve beyond the constraints of his profession. The empire that had been nearly destroyed by fraud and betrayal had not only survived, but had transformed into something more stable, more principled, and fundamentally more human. The voice of one ordinary person speaking truth in a room of silence had become the foundation upon which a new era was constructed. And that foundation, though it remained hidden from the world, would support everything that followed.